Welcome to Eternal Darkness, where nightmares come to life. I'll be your host through these twisted tales tonight. Before we descend into the shadows, remember to like and subscribe to join our growing community of horror enthusiasts. Get comfortable, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself as we begin our journey into the unknown. It was the first night of spring break in 2018, and I had made what seemed like a simple decision that would haunt me for months afterward. My father, Gregory, had suggested we take a camping trip to East Texas. Just the two of us, like we used to do when I was younger. At 22, I thought I was too old for father-son bonding trips, but something about his insistence made me agree. Maybe it was the way his hands shook slightly when he asked, or how he'd been drinking more heavily since Mom left 6 months earlier. We loaded up his old pickup truck with our gear, a two-person tent that had seen better days, sleeping bags that smelled of mothballs and old campfires, and enough supplies for 3 days in the wilderness. I packed my machete, a graduation gift from my grandfather that I'd never actually used for anything more threatening than cutting rope. The weight of it against my hip gave me a false sense of security that I would desperately need later. The drive to the campsite took us deeper into East Texas than I'd ever been. The highway gradually narrowed to a 2-lane road, then to a gravel path that seemed to disappear into the thick pine forest. Gregory drove with the focused intensity of someone trying to outrun his thoughts, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. We barely spoke during the 3-hour journey, the silence filled only by the static-laden country music station and the occasional rattle of our supplies in the truck bed. When we finally reached the remote camping area, the sun was already sinking low behind the tree line. The spot Gregory had chosen was isolated. No other campers in sight. No facilities, just a small clearing surrounded by towering pines that seemed to lean inward like curious giants. The air smelled thick with pine sap and something else I couldn't identify, something earthy and slightly sweet that made my stomach turn. As we unloaded our gear, I noticed how quiet everything was. Not the peaceful quiet of nature, but an oppressive silence that seemed to press against my eardrums. Even the wind barely stirred the pine needles above us, creating only the faintest whisper of sound. Gregory moved with jerky, nervous energy, setting up the tent with shaking hands that he tried to hide by working faster. "You feeling all right, Dad?" I asked as I watched him struggle with the tent poles. Fine, he muttered, not meeting my eyes. "Just tired from the drive." But it wasn't tiredness I saw on his face. It was something else. A tightness around his eyes, a way he kept glancing over his shoulder at the tree line. When he thought I wasn't looking, I caught him pulling a small flask from his jacket pocket and taking a quick swig. The smell of whiskey mixed with the forest air, creating a nauseating combination that would forever remind me of that night. We managed to get the tent up just as darkness fell with startling suddenness. The temperature dropped immediately, and I found myself pulling my jacket tighter around my shoulders. Gregory built a fire with practiced efficiency, the flames casting dancing shadows that seemed to move independently of the flickering light. We sat on opposite sides of the fire, eating cold sandwiches and saying little. The flames hypnotized me, and I found my eyelids growing heavy despite the early hour. Gregory had been drinking steadily since we'd arrived, and his speech was beginning to slur. He told rambling stories about his own father, about camping trips from his childhood, about things that had happened in these woods decades ago. His voice took on a strange quality in the firelight, sometimes too loud, sometimes dropping to an almost inaudible whisper. "You ever wonder what's really out there?" he asked suddenly, gesturing toward the dark forest beyond our small circle of light. I laughed nervously. "What do you mean?" "Nothing," he said quickly, taking another drink. "Nothing at all." We turned in early, around 9 o'clock, both exhausted from the day's travel and setup. The tent felt smaller than it had looked in the store, and Gregory's restless movements made the thin fabric walls shake with every turn. He'd brought his flask inside, and the smell of alcohol was overwhelming in the confined space. I lay on my side, trying to find a comfortable position on the uneven ground, listening to my father's increasingly labored breathing. For a while, the only sounds were the soft whistle of wind through pine needles and the occasional pop of settling wood in our dying fire. I was just beginning to drift off when Gregory suddenly sat bolt upright, his breathing sharp and panicked. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I listened carefully but heard nothing beyond the normal forest sounds. "Hear what?" "Never mind," he said. but I could feel the tension radiating from his body. He lay back down, but I could tell he wasn't sleeping. His breathing remained shallow and quick, and every few minutes he would shift position or reach for his flask. I must have dozed off sometime after 11, because the next thing I remember was being jolted awake by a sound that shot through me like electricity. A dog was barking somewhere in the distance. Not the happy bark of a pet at play, but the frantic, desperate barking of an animal in distress. The sound was raw and continuous, filled with a terror that made my heart pound. My phone's dim screen showed 12:30 a.m. The barking continued without pause, echoing through the forest with an intensity that seemed to drill into my skull. Alongside the noise, a crushing headache was building behind my eyes, starting as a dull throb and quickly escalating to a sharp stabbing pain that made me nauseous. The dog's barking went on for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence that followed was complete and unnatural. No insects chirping, no owls hooting, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. It was as if every living thing in the forest had suddenly held its breath. I'd only been camping twice before, both times with organized groups and experienced guides. But even I knew that total silence in a forest meant danger. Predators move quietly, and their presence sends every other animal into hiding. My mouth went dry as I realized what this might mean. Gregory was snoring softly beside me, apparently unaffected by the oppressive quiet or my growing anxiety. The headache was getting worse, a sharp pain that seemed to pulse with my heartbeat. I pressed my palms against my temples, trying to relieve the pressure, but nothing helped. The pain was so intense that I began to feel dizzy and disoriented. Colors seemed to flash behind my closed eyelids, and I wondered if I was getting sick. I tried to wake Gregory, gently shaking his shoulder, but he just mumbled something incoherent and rolled away from me. The smell of alcohol on his breath was so strong it made me gag. I was truly alone with whatever was out there in the darkness, and the realization filled me with a creeping dread that settled into my bones like ice water. Just as I was beginning to convince myself that I was overreacting, a new sound shattered the silence. It started low and grew in volume and intensity, a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It was part scream, part roar, part something else entirely. The closest I could come to describing it was like a mountain lion's cry mixed with a woman's scream and the terrified whinny of a horse, all blended together into something that seemed to come from the depths of hell itself. The horrible sound repeated 3 more times, each repetition lasting about 20 seconds. During the third occurrence, Gregory suddenly sat up straight, his eyes wide and unfocused. For a moment he looked directly at me with an expression of pure terror, his mouth opening as if to speak. Then his eyes rolled back and he collapsed onto his sleeping bag, unconscious. I reached out to check if he was breathing, my hands shaking violently. His pulse was strong but rapid, and he was mumbling incoherently in his unconscious state. The smell of alcohol seemed even stronger now, mixed with the sour scent of fierce sweat. I realized that his drinking had probably saved him from fully experiencing whatever was happening outside our tent. The unnatural crying stopped as abruptly as it had begun, leaving me in that terrible silence again. My headache had reached unbearable levels, and I found myself fighting waves of nausea. Every few minutes, sharp pains would shoot through my skull like lightning, leaving me gasping and disoriented. I wondered if something in the air or water was affecting me, some kind of toxin or poison that was causing hallucinations. I managed to doze fitfully for the next few hours, drifting in and out of a troubled sleep filled with fragmented nightmares. In my dreams, I was being hunted through the forest by something I couldn't see but could always hear. Breathing heavily, breaking branches, getting closer and closer until I would jolt awake in a cold sweat. At 3:15 a.m. I was awakened again, this time by the sound of a rooster crowing in the distance. The sound was jarringly normal after the night's terrifying audio assault, but it seemed wrong somehow. Too loud, too clear, too close for a rooster to be in the middle of this wilderness. The crowing continued for several minutes, each call echoing through the forest with unnatural clarity. The headache was now so severe that I could barely think straight. The pain seemed to be affecting my vision, creating strange shadows and movements in my peripheral vision that disappeared when I tried to focus on them. I fumbled through my backpack, desperately searching for the bottle of pain medication I'd packed. As I was digging through my supplies trying to find relief for the crushing pain in my head, another sound began. At first it seemed normal, the braying of a donkey, which while unusual in this location, wasn't impossible. Farmers sometimes let their animals graze in remote areas. But as the sound continued, it began to change in ways that made my skin crawl. The braying grew deeper and more guttural, transforming into something that sounded like a heavy smoker gasping for breath through damaged lungs. The sound was wet and labored, punctuated by horrible gurgling noises that suggested something was terribly wrong with whatever was making them. Between the gasping breaths, I could hear what sounded like choking or retching. The combination of the escalating pain in my head and these increasingly disturbing sounds was pushing me toward a breaking point. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality, unable to trust my own senses or distinguish between what was real and what might be hallucinations brought on by the severe headache and stress. Gregory remained unconscious beside me, his breathing shallow but steady. Part of me envied his alcohol-induced escape from whatever nightmare we'd stumbled into. I considered trying to wake him again, but his earlier reaction had scared me almost as much as the sounds outside. Finally, I couldn't stand being trapped in the tent any longer. The walls seemed to be closing in on me, and the air felt thick and suffocating. I needed to move, to do something active rather than lie there helplessly listening to sounds that shouldn't exist. I also desperately needed to find that pain medication before my head exploded, against every instinct screaming at me to stay hidden. I unzipped the tent and crawled outside into the night air. The first thing I noticed was the rain. Not the clean, fresh rain of a normal spring storm, but a thick, greasy drizzle that seemed to coat everything it touched. The droplets felt wrong against my skin, leaving a metallic taste in the air that reminded me of blood. The smell was nauseating, and I had to fight back the urge to vomit. I stumbled away from the tent, my legs shaky and unsteady from the pain and stress. The nearly full moon provided enough light to see clearly, casting everything in stark black and white. I found a tree at the edge of our campsite and relieved myself, trying to stay as quiet as possible while the strange rain continued to fall around me. As I was finishing, I heard rustling in the bushes about 30 feet away, coming from the direction where I'd heard the gasping, choking sounds. The noise was deliberate and heavy, like something large moving through the undergrowth without any attempt at stealth. My blood seemed to freeze in my veins as I slowly turned toward the sound. Near the base of a large pine tree, I could see something pale against the dark forest floor. At first, I thought it might be a piece of trash or camping equipment left by previous visitors. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was organic, what looked like chunks of raw, rotting meat scattered on the ground. The smell hit me then, a putrid stench of decay that made my stomach lurch violently. Then something emerged from the bushes. My first thought was that it was a person, someone who might be hurt or lost. But as it came into the moonlight, I could see that something was terribly wrong. The figure was unnaturally pale, almost gray in the moonlight, and moved with a pronounced limp that suggested serious injury. Its posture was wrong too, bent forward at an impossible angle as if its spine had been damaged. I stood frozen, afraid to move or breathe, hoping desperately that it wouldn't notice me. The figure seemed completely focused on the rotting meat on the ground, moving toward it with single-minded determination. When it reached the carrion, it bent down, not crouching like a normal person would, but folding in half like a broken doll. What I witnessed next will haunt me for the rest of my life. The figure began eating the rotting meat with desperate animal hunger. I could hear the wet sounds of tearing flesh and the horrible slurping noises of someone, or something, consuming something that should never be eaten. The sounds were amplified in the night air, each disgusting detail crystal clear in the silence. I remained motionless, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it could be heard. The intense headache made it difficult to focus, and I began to wonder if what I was seeing was real, or some kind of pain-induced hallucination. The metallic rain continued to fall, creating small rivulets that caught the moonlight and looked disturbingly like flowing blood. After what felt like an eternity, the figure finished its gruesome meal and slowly straightened up. For a terrifying moment, I thought it might turn in my direction, but instead it limped back toward the bushes from which it had emerged. I watched as it disappeared into the dark forest, leaving me alone with the overwhelming stench of decay and the horrible memory of what I'd witnessed. I stood there for several more minutes, trembling uncontrollably, before my legs finally gave out and I collapsed to my knees in the muddy campsite. The reality of what I'd seen, or thought I'd seen, crashed over me like a wave. Was it a person suffering from some horrible disease? A homeless individual driven to desperate measures by starvation? Or had the pain and stress of the night caused me to hallucinate the entire encounter? The headache was beginning to subside slightly, but the nausea was getting worse. I crawled back to the tent and fumbled through my pack until I found the pain medication. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely open the bottle, and I had to use my teeth to get the cap off. As I dry swallowed 3 tablets, I tried to make sense of what had happened. The dog's frantic barking, the unnatural sounds, the figure eating carrion in the moonlight. Were they all connected? Different manifestations of the same thing? Or were they separate events that my stressed mind had woven together into a coherent but false narrative? I crawled back into the tent and lay down beside Gregory, who was still unconscious and reeking of alcohol. For the rest of the night I lay awake, jumping at every sound, trying to distinguish between reality and the lingering effects of whatever had caused my severe headache and apparent hallucinations. When dawn finally broke, I discovered that Gregory had no memory of the night's events. He woke up hungover and confused, complaining about strange dreams but unable to remember any details. We broke camp quickly and drove home in near silence, both lost in our own thoughts. In the months that followed, I've tried to research what might have caused my experiences that night. Severe dehydration, altitude sickness, toxic plants, contaminated water. Any number of factors could have contributed to hallucinations and auditory disturbances. But deep down, I can't shake the feeling that what I saw and heard was real. I've never told anyone the complete story until now. Gregory died 6 months later. Liver failure from his drinking, and took any potential corroboration with him to the grave. Sometimes I wonder if he saw or heard things that night too, things that drove him even deeper into the bottle during his final months. I still have nightmares about that pale figure bent over the carrion, about the sounds that seemed to come from something not quite human, whether real or imagined. Those images are burned into my memory forever. I've never been camping since, and I doubt I ever will again. If anyone reading this has had similar experiences in East Texas or elsewhere, I'd be grateful to hear from you. I need to know whether I'm losing my mind, or whether there are things in this world that can't be easily explained by science and reason. Either answer would be better than this uncertainty that haunts me every day. All I know for certain is that some experiences change you forever, regardless of whether they're real or not. That night in the East Texas forest changed me in ways I'm still trying to understand, and sometimes in the darkest hours before dawn, I can still hear those sounds echoing in my memory, reminding me that there are mysteries in this world that may be better left unsolved. New Zealand has always been my refuge from the chaos of the world. Born in Australia but raised here for 34 years, I've come to understand this land intimately. The islands stretch before you like a painter's masterpiece, all rolling green hills and pristine lakes that mirror the sky so perfectly you question which way is up. Every trail I've walked, every campsite I've discovered, has reinforced one fundamental truth: this place is safe. Unlike my birthplace, where every shadow might conceal something deadly, New Zealand's isolation created a sanctuary. For millions of years, only birds ruled these islands. No predators stalked through the undergrowth. No venomous creatures waited in dark corners. When the Maori arrived centuries ago, they brought pigs, rats, and dogs. The Europeans added cats, weasels, and stoats to the mix. But in all my years here, wandering through remote valleys and sleeping under star-filled skies, I'd never encountered anything that made my heart race with genuine fear. The worst I'd faced was an irritated possum or perhaps a territorial tomcat defending its territory. Even the wild pigs, descendants of those first Maori arrivals, kept to themselves in the deeper bush. This knowledge had shaped every outdoor adventure I'd undertaken. I could set up camp anywhere, sleep soundly in my tent, and wake refreshed without ever checking over my shoulder or keeping one eye open through the night. This confidence, this absolute certainty in the safety of my adopted homeland, would soon be tested in ways I never imagined possible. When my cousin reached out through social media suggesting she visit from Australia, I felt genuine excitement for the first time in months. We'd only met as toddlers, brief encounters lost in the fog of early childhood memories. I retained fragments of playing together in Sydney when I was barely 3 years old, but she remembered nothing of those days. Our online conversations had revealed a kindred spirit, someone who shared my love for the outdoors and craved adventure. When she mentioned wanting to experience New Zealand's legendary landscapes, I immediately began planning an epic journey across the South Island. We would start from my home in Christchurch and wind our way through some of the most breathtaking scenery on Earth. The South Island holds secrets that the North Island cannot match. Where the North offers geothermal wonders and volcanic drama, the South provides raw, untamed wilderness that speaks to something primal in the human soul. I envisioned us standing beneath Mount Cook's towering presence, hiking through valleys where the only sounds are wind through tussock grass and the distant cry of native birds. Her arrival energized me in unexpected ways. After years of solitary camping trips, the prospect of sharing these experiences with family felt like a gift. We spent her first evening at my house, poring over maps and discussing our route. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself remembering why I'd fallen in love with this landscape despite my complicated relationship with living here permanently. The plan was simple: head south to Mount Cook, then continue exploring as weather and mood dictated. Neither of us anticipated how dramatically our journey would deviate from that innocent itinerary. The morning of our departure arrived gray and uninspiring. Heavy clouds hung low over Christchurch, promising the kind of weather that makes outdoor enthusiasts reconsider their plans. But we loaded our gear anyway, optimistic that conditions would improve as we traveled inland toward the mountains. By afternoon, as we approached Mount Cook National Park, rain began falling in steady sheets. The iconic peak remained hidden behind layers of cloud, and the prospect of setting up camp in these conditions felt more like punishment than adventure. My cousin pressed her face against the passenger window, watching water stream down the glass, and suggested we continue south rather than endure a miserable night in soggy tents. Her suggestion proved wise. As we drove deeper into the heart of the South Island, the rain gradually lessened, then stopped entirely. The clouds began breaking apart, revealing patches of blue sky that promised a clearer evening ahead. Our spirits lifted with the improving weather, and we began searching for an alternative camping spot. The place we eventually discovered seemed perfect, tucked away from main roads, accessible only by a narrow gravel track that wound through dense native forest. It offered everything we needed: level ground near a flowing river, surrounded by towering trees that would provide shelter from any wind. The isolation felt complete, the kind of pristine wilderness that makes you believe you're the first humans to ever set foot in this particular corner of the world. As daylight began fading, we knew we'd found our sanctuary for the night. The forest wrapped around us like a protective embrace, and the sound of running water promised a peaceful sleep. Setting up camp as darkness approaches always carries a certain urgency, but that evening felt different somehow. Perhaps it was the unfamiliar surroundings, or maybe the way shadows seemed to gather more quickly than usual beneath the dense canopy. My cousin worked efficiently, unpacking her gear while I struggled with my tent. The realization that my tent was missing crucial components hit me like a physical blow. Stakes, guy lines, even part of the rain fly had somehow disappeared since my last camping trip months ago. Standing there holding useless fabric and bent poles, I felt embarrassment wash over me. What kind of experienced outdoorsman brings defective equipment on such an important trip? My cousin took the news with surprising grace, immediately offering to share her two-person tent. The arrangement would be cramped but manageable, and we were family after all. Still, the situation felt awkward given that we barely knew each other as adults, and the prospect of sharing such close quarters added an unexpected layer of complexity to our adventure. We managed to get a fire burning just as true darkness settled over the forest. The flames danced hypnotically, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow among the surrounding trees. The river's constant murmur provided a soothing soundtrack as we cooked our simple meal and talked about everything and nothing. Under that vast canopy of stars, visible through gaps in the forest ceiling, our earlier awkwardness dissolved. We shared stories from our respective childhoods, compared notes on family members we'd both known, and marveled at how chance and social media had brought us together after so many years apart. Eventually, fatigue overtook conversation, and we retreated to the tent, still talking quietly as we settled into our sleeping bags. Consciousness returned in fragments, pulled from deep sleep by something my mind couldn't immediately identify. The tent around me seemed smaller, darker, filled with an oppressive weight that pressed against my chest. I sat up quickly, automatically checking on my cousin beside me. What I saw will haunt me forever. She lay twisted in her sleeping bag, head thrown back at an unnatural angle, black liquid bubbling from her mouth and nose. But it was her throat that made my stomach lurch with primal terror. A ragged gash stretched from ear to ear, so deep I could see pale bone gleaming through the torn flesh. Blood poured from the wound in rhythmic pulses, soaking into her sleeping bag and pooling beneath her head. Her eyes were open but unfocused, rolling back and forth as she made horrible gurgling sounds. Her hands clawed weakly at the air, fingers grasping for something that wasn't there. The metallic scent of blood filled the cramped space, so thick I could taste it on my tongue. I tried to move to help her somehow, but my body refused to respond. Terror had frozen every muscle, every nerve. All I could do was watch as the life drained from her body in horrifying spurts, listen to those awful choking sounds that seemed to go on forever. The blackness that surrounded us felt alive, pressing closer with each of her fading heartbeats. Something had done this to her, something that might still be nearby, waiting in the darkness just outside our thin tent walls. Then I was gasping, bolt upright in my sleeping bag, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The tent around me was normal, quiet except for my cousin's peaceful breathing beside me. Moonlight filtered through the fabric, revealing her sleeping form, completely unharmed. But the dream had felt more real than reality itself. Morning light filtering through the tent brought relief but couldn't entirely banish the lingering unease from my nightmare. As we packed our sleeping bags and prepared for another day of exploration, I found myself studying my cousin's throat, reassuring myself that no wounds marred her skin. When I finally described the dream to her, she listened with growing concern. The vivid details, the way I could still smell blood hours later, the absolute certainty that she was dying horribly while I watched helplessly. It all tumbled out in a rush of words that left me feeling drained and foolish. She tried to reassure me, suggesting that camping in unfamiliar surroundings sometimes triggers strange dreams. We both agreed it was probably nothing more than my subconscious processing the strangeness of our situation. But when I unzipped the tent door and stepped outside, every rational explanation evaporated. The rabbit lay directly in front of our tent entrance, positioned where we couldn't possibly miss it. Its small body was intact, except for the throat, which had been torn open with surgical precision. No other wounds marked its gray fur, no signs of feeding or scavenging. Just that single devastating injury that had opened its neck in a gaping red smile. Fresh blood still glistened on the surrounding grass, indicating the kill had happened recently, probably during the night while we slept mere feet away. But what kind of predator kills without eating? What hunter leaves its prey displayed like a macabre gift? My cousin emerged from the tent behind me and gasped when she saw the carcass. The similarity to my dream was impossible to ignore, impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Something had been nearby during the night, something that killed with ruthless efficiency and left its victim as a message. We stood there in the morning sunlight, staring at the dead rabbit, while the forest around us seemed to watch and wait. The next hour passed in a haze of confusion and growing dread. We searched the immediate area for tracks, for any sign of what might have killed the rabbit, but found nothing conclusive. The soft earth near the river showed prints from various small animals, but nothing large enough or distinct enough to explain our midnight visitor. My cousin suggested photographing the scene, documenting everything before we disturbed it further. As she snapped pictures with her phone, I found myself scanning the tree line constantly, expecting to glimpse whatever predator had marked our territory during the night. The logical part of my mind struggled to find explanations. Perhaps a feral cat had made the kill, but been frightened away before feeding. Maybe a stoat had dragged the rabbit here from elsewhere, though that seemed unlikely given the fresh blood. But every rational theory felt inadequate when confronted with the precision of that single wound and the deliberate positioning of the carcass. We broke camp quickly, neither of us voicing our desire to leave this place behind. As we loaded our gear into the car, I kept expecting to find more evidence, more signs of whatever had visited us. But the forest revealed nothing, keeping its secrets locked away beneath layers of green silence. During the drive back toward Christchurch, we dissected every moment of the previous night, searching for clues we might have missed. Had either of us heard anything unusual? Had there been sounds from the forest that didn't belong? But our memories yielded nothing helpful, just the peaceful evening we remembered followed by my nightmare and the morning's grisly discovery. The questions multiplied with each passing mile, but answers remained frustratingly elusive. Years have passed since that night in the forest, but the memory remains as sharp as broken glass. My cousin returned to Australia with her own collection of unanswered questions, and though we still communicate regularly, we rarely discuss what we experienced together. The official explanation, the one we tell ourselves and others, involves a feral cat, or possibly a stoat, that happened upon a rabbit near our campsite. Wildlife experts assure us that such behavior, while unusual, falls within the realm of possibility. Predators sometimes kill without feeding, especially when territory is being established or defended. But I know what I saw in my dream, and I know what we found outside our tent. The connection between those two events defies every rational explanation I've attempted to construct. How does the human mind conjure such specific imagery hours before discovering a reality that mirrors it so precisely? I still camp throughout New Zealand, still explore remote valleys, and sleep under star-filled skies. But something fundamental changed that night. Now I carry a flashlight with extra batteries, and I find myself listening more carefully to the sounds that emerge from darkness. The absolute confidence I once felt in this land's safety has been replaced by a more cautious awareness. Sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, I wonder if we encountered something that science hasn't yet cataloged, something that chooses to remain hidden in the vast wilderness that still covers much of these islands. Or perhaps we simply experienced one of those rare moments when the boundary between dreams and reality becomes permeable, allowing dark premonitions to bleed through into the waking world. Whatever visited us that night left more than a dead rabbit outside our tent. It left questions that may never find answers, and a reminder that even in the safest places on Earth, mystery and terror can still find ways to reach us. The throat in the dark remains an open wound in my memory, bleeding shadows into every night since. I never planned to become a park ranger. Growing up in suburban Milwaukee, my idea of wilderness was the patch of woods behind the local high school where kids went to smoke. But after 4 years studying environmental science at UW-Madison and another 2 years bouncing between meaningless office jobs, I found myself craving something more authentic than fluorescent lights and spreadsheets. The job posting appeared on usajobs.gov like a sign from the universe. Park Ranger GS5, Keyuhana National Forest, Montana. Remote station. Housing provided. The name caught my attention first. Keyuhana, from the Salish language meaning where the earth speaks. The forest stretched across 2.3 million acres of pristine wilderness along the Canadian border, one of the most isolated ranger districts in the continental United States. My interview was conducted over a crackling phone connection with District Ranger Rebecca Winters. Her voice carried the weathered confidence of someone who'd spent decades in the backcountry. "I'll be straight with you," she said. "This isn't Yellowstone. We get maybe 200 visitors a year, mostly hardcore backpackers and hunters. Your nearest neighbor will be 47 miles away on a good day. Cell service is non-existent. Radio is your lifeline. Can you handle that kind of isolation?" I told her I could. I lied. 3 months later, I drove my beaten Subaru up the final stretch of Forest Service Road 482, my knuckles white on the steering wheel as I navigated washouts and fallen trees. The radio had lost signal hours ago. My phone had been searching for service since I'd passed through Whitefish, the last real town before the wilderness swallowed everything whole. Cabin 4 appeared through the trees like something from an old photograph. A modest A-frame structure built in 1952 according to my briefing packet. Dark wood weathered to gray-green metal roof spotted with rust, a stone chimney rising from the north side. It sat on a small rise overlooking Misquaw Lake, whose name meant Red Bear in Ojibwe, though I wouldn't learn why until much later. The previous ranger, Marcus Weatherby, had left 3 weeks before my arrival. His transfer had been sudden, Rebecca told me. Family emergency back east. He'd left the cabin in good order, firewood stacked, pantry stocked with canned goods, detailed notes about the district's trails and trouble spots. But something felt off the moment I stepped inside. It wasn't anything obvious. The place was clean, organized, even welcoming in a rustic way. Cast iron cookware hung from hooks above the wood stove. Topographical maps covered one wall. Books filled handmade shelves. Field guides. wilderness medicine, local history. But there was an undercurrent of wrongness, like walking into a room where an argument had just ended. I found Weatherby's logbook on the desk by the window. Standard entries at first. Weather observations, trail conditions, wildlife sightings. Then the tone shifted. His handwriting became cramped, urgent. May 15. Unusual activity near the North Shore. Large prints, not bare. Measured 19 inches. Stride length 6 feet. May 18. Found Jacobson's camp abandoned. Tent shredded. No blood. Search ongoing. May 22. Radio interference getting worse. Heard voices in static last night. Not English. Not any language I recognize. May 27. They know I know. The final entry was just a date. May 30. His transfer came through June 20. I closed the logbook and looked out at Misquaw Lake. The water was dark as coffee, reflecting the dense forest that pressed in from all sides. In the failing light, I could see the North Shore Weatherby had mentioned, maybe half a mile across the water. Nothing moved there except the trees swaying in the wind. That first night, I built a fire in the wood stove and made dinner from a can of chili. The silence outside was absolute. No insects, no birds, no small animals rustling in the underbrush. Just the pop of burning wood and my own breathing. I'd expected the quiet to be peaceful. Instead, it felt expectant, like the forest was holding its breath. Around midnight, something woke me. Not a sound exactly. More like the absence of sound, as if the already quiet night had somehow deepened. I lay in the narrow bunk, listening. Then I heard it. A low whistle, musical but wrong, like someone trying to imitate a bird call without understanding how birds actually sounded. It came from the direction of the lake. I grabbed my flashlight and sidled up to the window. The beam barely penetrated the darkness beyond the glass. The whistle came again, closer now, followed by what sounded like footsteps on the gravel path leading to the cabin. Heavy footsteps. Deliberate. My training kicked in. I reached for the radio. Dispatch. This is Cabin 4. I have unauthorized persons approaching my location. Please respond. Static. Dispatch. This is Ranger Station 4. Do you copy? Nothing but white noise. Though I could swear I heard something underneath it. Whispers maybe, or wind through trees or something pretending to be wind through trees. The footsteps stopped directly outside my door. In my equipment locker, I had bear spray, a .44 Magnum, and a lifetime of suburban softness that hadn't prepared me for whatever was standing on my porch. I grabbed both weapons and positioned myself where I could see the door. The knock, when it came, was almost polite. 3 measured raps, like a neighbor coming to borrow sugar. Then silence. Then 3 more knocks, harder this time. The door, solid oak, built to withstand Montana winters, shuddered in its frame. Forest Service law enforcement, I called out, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Identify yourself. The knocking stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard breathing. Deep, rhythmic breathing that seemed to come from a chest much larger than any human's. Then footsteps again, moving away, circling the cabin. I followed the sound from window to window, flashlight beam sweeping the darkness, seeing nothing but catching glimpses of movement just beyond the light's reach. It circled 3 times. On the 4th pass, it stopped at the north window, the one facing the lake. I approached slowly, weapon raised, and found myself looking at nothing. Just darkness and my own pale reflection in the glass. Then the reflection moved. Not my reflection. Something behind the glass. Matching my movements but wrong. Distorted. Too tall. Too broad. Eyes that caught the flashlight beam and threw it back like an animal's. But higher than any animal's eyes should be. We stood there, separated by a 1/4 inch of glass, studying each other. It smiled. I know how that sounds. But it smiled, too many teeth in too wide a mouth, and then it was gone. Not turning away, not walking, just gone, like it had never been there at all. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the center of the cabin with my back to the wood stove, weapons in my lap, radio crackling with static beside me. When dawn finally came, painting Misquaw Lake the color of old blood, I went outside to look for tracks. I found them. Huge depressions in the soft earth, 5-toed but wrong, with what looked like claw marks at the tips. They circled the cabin exactly 4 times, just as I'd heard. But where they stopped at the north window, where that thing had stood looking in at me, the tracks simply ended, as if whatever made them had lifted straight up into the air. I took measurements, just like Weatherby had. 19 inches, stride length 6 feet. That's when I understood why the previous ranger had really left. And why, despite every instinct screaming at me to get in my car and drive back to Milwaukee, I couldn't. Because someone had to be here, someone had to watch, someone had to warn the hikers and hunters who would come, unaware of what lived in these woods. I was 26 years old, 3 days into my new job, and I'd already seen something that shouldn't exist. Over the next months I would see much more. I would learn why the lake was named for a red bear, though no bears lived here anymore. I would understand what Weatherby meant when he wrote "They know I know," and I would discover that some wilderness areas are remote for a reason. But first, I had to survive that first week. And to do that, I had to learn the rules, the real rules, not the ones they teach you at ranger training. Rules like, never go to the North Shore alone, don't investigate whistles after dark, and whatever you do, whatever you see, don't let them know you know. Because in Kiyuhana Forest, knowing is the most dangerous thing of all. 2 weeks into the job, I made my first friend. His name was Roy Nakai, a Blackfeet ranger stationed 70 miles north at the Belly River entrance to Glacier. We connected over the radio during one of those rare windows when atmospheric conditions aligned just right. Cabin 4, this is Glacier Station 7. You're coming in clear. How's the weather down there? I nearly dropped my coffee. After 14 days of static and isolation, hearing another human voice felt like finding water in a desert. Glacier 7. This is Cabin 4. Weather's clear. Temp about 45. Good to hear another voice out here. New guy, right? Rebecca mentioned you. I'm Roy. Been working the line up here for 12 years. We talked for 20 minutes before the static swallowed his signal. But it was enough. Roy gave me frequencies to try, times when the skip was best, names of other rangers scattered across the northern Rockies. Over the following weeks, I built a network of voices in the wilderness. Martina at Bowman Lake, Jinsu at Waterton Lakes across the Canadian border, Declan managing a research station in the Bob Marshall Wilderness. It was Martina who first mentioned the forum. You ever check out Rod/Backcountry Rangers? She asked one evening. I'd driven to the nearest town with cell service, ostensibly for supplies but really for human contact. Private sub. Verification required. But it's where we really talk. The forum changed everything. Here were hundreds of rangers, wilderness guides and backcountry workers sharing experiences they couldn't put in official reports. Stories that would get you laughed out of headquarters, or worse, sent for psychological evaluation. I spent hours scrolling through posts. Trailcam caught something on Mount Stimson. Regional says it's a double exposure. I've been developing film for 20 years. That's not a double exposure. Anyone else having issues with compasses near the 49th parallel? Mine spins like a weather vane whenever I get within a mile of certain valleys. Found another bear attack victim yesterday. Same wounds as the others. Since when do bears leave tracks with opposable thumbs? But it was a post from 3 years ago that made my blood chill. Misquaw Lake warning. Please read. For anyone assigned to the Kiyuhana district, especially Cabin 4, you need to know what you're really dealing with. The Forest Service won't put it in writing, but there's a reason that posting has the highest turnover rate in the northern Rockies. The thing about Misquaw Lake isn't the isolation. It's what the isolation is meant to contain. The Kootenai people have stories going back generations about the Staiha, the hungry giant. First contact journals from French trappers mention les hommes sauvages in the same breath as warnings to avoid the red water. I've attached my personal logs below. Everything I couldn't put in official reports. Read them, believe them, and whatever you do, never let it know you're watching it. Watching you. The logs were extensive. 18 months of encounters, each more disturbing than the last. Weatherby had been methodical, scientific even. He'd documented patterns, increased activity during new moons, territorial behavior around certain valleys, an apparent intelligence that went beyond animal instinct. One entry stood out. November 15, made contact with Dr. Patricia Osborne from University of Washington. She's been studying hair samples I collected near the Yak River Trail. Preliminary DNA analysis shows unknown primate, but with markers that don't match any known species. She wants to come out for field research. I told her absolutely not. Some knowledge isn't worth the risk. I searched for Dr. Osborne online, found her faculty page, her published papers on Pacific Northwest biodiversity. Then I found her obituary. Died in a hiking accident in the North Cascades, December 2021. Body never recovered. That night, back at Cabin 4, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The sensation had been growing stronger since my first encounter. A constant pressure between my shoulder blades. I'd started leaving lights on, playing music to fill the silence. Anything to make the cabin feel less like a trap. Around 2 a.m., the radio crackled to life. Anyone out there? This is... Christ, I don't know what my call sign is anymore. This is Garrett, the mushroom researcher. I'm at the old growth study site, grid reference 48.9-14.3. Something's wrong, really wrong. I grabbed the handset. Garrett, this is Cabin 4. What's your situation? Thank God. I've been trying to raise someone for hours. My sat phone's dead. Regular radio's just getting static. I'm about 8 miles northeast of you. There's something in my camp. 8 miles. In daylight on good trails, that was 2 hours. At night through heavy forest, it might as well have been on the moon. Can you get to your vehicle? Negative. It's between me and the truck. I'm in the equipment shed. Jesus, it's big. Really big. It killed Jerome. Tore him right out of his sleeping bag. I can see his body from here. What the hell is that thing? I knew. In my bones, I knew. Garrett, listen carefully. Is there another exit from the shed? Back window. But it's small. I don't know if... You need to go. Now. Don't run straight. Zigzag. Use the trees. Head southwest toward the creek. The water might... A crash came through the radio, followed by Garrett's scream, then tearing metal, splintering wood, and sounds I still hear in nightmares, wet, organic sounds that spoke of appetite beyond animal hunger. Garrett? Garrett, respond. Nothing but static. I sat there, handset gripped white-knuckle tight, listening to dead air. 8 miles. He'd been 8 miles away while something tore him apart, and there was nothing I could do. No backup to call, no cavalry coming over the hill, just me in a cabin by a dark lake, with the certain knowledge that whatever killed Garrett knew exactly where I was. The next morning I called it in. Told Rebecca there'd been a distress call, possible animal attack. A search team found the camp that afternoon. The official report blamed a grizzly, though no one could explain why a bear would peel the roof off a reinforced equipment shed like opening a can of sardines, or why Garrett's remains were arranged in a pattern that looked almost deliberate. They found Jerome too, what was left of him. The mushroom study was suspended indefinitely. I started keeping Weatherby's logs next to my own, cross-referencing sightings, looking for patterns he might have missed. The forum became my lifeline, a place where I could share without being called crazy. Roy, Martina, Jinsu, they understood. They'd seen things too, heard whispers in the static, found tracks that didn't belong to anything in the field guides. It's getting bolder, Roy told me one night. Used to be you'd go months without a sighting. Now it's every few weeks. And the attacks, they're not random anymore. It's targeting researchers. Anyone who gets too close to understanding. Then why not us? I asked. Why leave the Rangers alone? Who says it's leaving us alone? Check the transfer rates. Check how many Rangers in the Northern Rockies take early retirement, stress leave, psychiatric discharge. It doesn't need to kill us. It just needs us gone. Or compliant. As long as we don't interfere, don't investigate too deeply. We're useful. We keep the civilians out of the dangerous areas. We write reports that blame bears and weather and accidents. We're part of the containment. The thought chilled me more than any midnight whistle. Were we protectors or collaborators? Were we saving lives by maintaining the fiction, or enabling something that should have been exposed decades ago? I found my answer 3 nights later when a family of 4 went missing on the Kintla Lake Trail. 2 adults, 2 kids, ages 8 and 11. Experienced hikers, well-equipped, perfect weather. They should have been fine. I joined the search, spent 3 days combing every inch of trail. We found their camp eventually, torn apart like Garrett's, but with no bodies. Just blood, so much blood. and tracks leading north toward the Canadian border. Tracks that the incident commander ordered us not to document. Bear attack, he said, not meeting anyone's eyes. Tragic but straightforward. No need to cause panic. That night I sat by Misquaw Lake and watched the stars reflect in water that looked black in the darkness but would show red come morning. Somewhere out there, a family was gone, erased as thoroughly as if they'd never existed, and I was expected to file a report that perpetuated the lie. But knowledge, as Weatherby learned, is a dangerous thing in Kiyuhana Forest. The more you know, the more it notices you noticing, and once it knows you know, the countdown begins. I'd been on the job 6 weeks. I had maybe another 6 before I became too much of a liability, before the whispers and the static started saying my name, before the tracks outside my cabin led only one way, unless I learned to play the game better than Weatherby, unless I found a way to document everything while appearing to document nothing, unless I discovered why Misquaw Lake ran red, and what the Stihiha really was, and how to survive knowing the truth. The radio crackled. Roy's voice, tinny with distance. "Cabin 4, you there? Got some intel from Jinsu you need to hear. It's about the lake, about why they really built your station where they did." I reached for the handset, aware that something in the forest was probably listening, probably had been all along. In Kiyuhana, the trees had ears, and the darkness had eyes, and the only thing worse than not knowing was letting anyone know that you knew. "Go ahead, Glacier 7, I said. "I'm listening." Jinsu's information came through in fragments over several nights, pieced together from conversations with Blackfoot elders and old surveyor records from the 1920s. The story of Misquaw Lake went deeper than either of us had imagined. The lake wasn't always there. His voice crackled through the static. Railroad surveys from 1923 show a valley with a small creek. Then something happened in 1924. Massive landslide, they said. Natural dam formation. But the time, he transmitted photos of old documents. I studied them on my laptop, squinting at faded ink and water-damaged pages. The official story was simple. Spring rains caused a mountainside collapse, blocked the valley, created the lake, case closed. But the surveyor's personal journals, which Jinsu had found in the Glenbow Museum archives, told a different story. April 12, 1924. The Kootenai guides refused to enter the valley. They speak of a bad death that must be contained. Superstitious nonsense, but it's delaying our progress. April 15. Found the source of native concerns. Cave system in the north face, extensive. Foreman wants to blast through for the rail line. Strange formations inside, almost architectural. April 18. 3 men missing. After entering the deeper chambers, search postponed due to unusual seismic activity. April 19, God help us. No entries after that. The landslide occurred April 20, burying the cave system under millions of tons of rock and creating Misquaw Lake. The railroad rerouted 50 miles south. The valley was designated federal wilderness, and for 30 years it seemed to work. But here's the thing, Jinsu continued. The lake level's been dropping. Climate change, they say. Drought conditions. But what happens when it drops low enough to expose what's underneath? I thought about the red water, how some mornings the lake looked like it was bleeding. Iron oxide, the geologist claimed. Natural mineral deposits. But I'd tested the water myself with the kit from the cabin. No unusual minerals. The red came from something else. That night, I decided to break protocol. I took the kayak out onto Misquaw Lake just after sunset, when the last hikers would have left the area but before full darkness made navigation impossible. The water was calm, mirror still, reflecting a sky caught between day and night. I paddled toward the north shore, where Weatherby's tracks had led, where I'd been explicitly told not to go alone. The rational part of my brain screamed warnings, but I needed answers. The families disappearing, the targeted attacks on researchers, the increasing boldness of whatever lived in these woods, it was accelerating, and sitting in my cabin writing sanitized reports wasn't going to stop it. The shore came up faster than expected. The water here was shallow, maybe 3 feet, and through it I could see structures. Angular stones too regular to be natural, arranged in patterns that hurt to look at directly. They seemed to shift when I wasn't focusing on them, rearranging themselves into configurations that suggested doorways, passages, chambers far below. I beached the kayak and stood on the muddy shore. The silence here was different. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of something that swallowed sound. My breathing seemed muffled, my heartbeat distant. The trees leaned in, cutting off the dying light. That's when I saw the prints. Fresh ones, less than an hour old, leading from the water up into the forest. But these weren't the massive five-toed impressions I'd found before. These were human, bare feet, adult-sized, walking with purpose. I followed them, flashlight cutting through the growing darkness. 50 yards in, the prints changed. The stride lengthened impossibly. The feet elongated, toes spreading wider. Another 20 yards, and they weren't human at all anymore. The transformation recorded in mud and moss, step by step, from one thing becoming another. The trail led to a clearing where the trees formed a perfect circle, their trunks scarred with symbols that could have been claw marks or could have been writing. In the center, a depression in the earth, roughly human-shaped but too large, as if something had lain there recently. The grass was dead in that spot, bleached white as old bones. I knelt beside it, ran my hand over the withered vegetation. It crumbled at my touch, releasing a smell like copper and ozone. Under the dead grass, the soil was warm, blood-warm, and moving, subtly, as if something beneath was breathing. A branch snapped behind me. I spun, hand going to the .44 on my hip, and found myself facing a man, naked, covered in mud and what might have been blood, standing at the edge of the clearing. His eyes caught my flashlight beam and reflected it back gold. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His voice was wrong, too deep, resonating in frequencies that made my teeth ache. "None of you should be here." "I'm a federal officer," I said, surprised my voice worked at all. "Are you injured? Do you need help?" He tilted his head, a gesture more animal than human. "Officer." He tasted the word. "Yes. You watch. You report. You maintain the boundaries. But you've crossed them now."
Who are you?
I was David Crenshaw, hiker from Seattle. That was before I found the cave, before the water showed me what I really was, what we all are, underneath, what's sleeping down there, waiting for the lake to drop just a little more. He took a step forward. In the flashlight beam, I could see his body changing, muscles rippling and expanding under skin that seemed barely able to contain them. His face elongated, jaw unhinging wider than any human jaw should. "Run," he said, the word barely intelligible through his transforming mouth. Run now, while part of me still remembers being David. I ran. Behind me, something howled, a sound that was part human scream, part something else, something older than mammals, older than anything that should exist in a Montana forest. Trees crashed as it pursued, no longer bothering with stealth. I burst onto the shore, threw myself into the kayak, paddled harder than I'd ever paddled in my life. Behind me, something massive hit the water. I didn't look back, focused only on the distant lights of my cabin, on making it to the illusion of safety, 4 walls provided. Halfway across, the pursuit stopped. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw it standing waist-deep in the lake, watching me. In the moonlight, it was a shadow against shadows, impossibly tall, wrong in every proportion. It could have caught me easily, but it didn't. It let me go. Let me return to my cabin, to my reports, to my role in the system that kept people away from the truth. Because I was useful as long as I was afraid, as long as I understood my place. I made it to shore, dragged the kayak up, stumbled into the cabin and barricaded the door. Then I sat at my desk and wrote everything down, every detail, knowing I could never submit it, knowing it would join Weatherby's hidden logs and all the other documentation of impossibility. The radio crackled. Roy's voice. "Cabin 4, you okay? Your transponder showed you on the lake. Please tell me you didn't go to the North Shore." "I'm okay," I lied. "Just needed to clear my head. Next time, clear it somewhere else." Martina just called. 2 more families missing in Glacier. Jinsu's had sightings in Waterton. It's happening everywhere now. Like something's changed. Like they're not hiding anymore. I thought about David Crenshaw, who'd been human until he wasn't. About the cave under the lake, exposed a little more each year as the water dropped. About things sleeping in flooded chambers, waiting. "Roy," I said, "what if we're not dealing with a species? What if it's a condition? Something that can be caught, or activated, or Don't. His voice was sharp. Don't go down that road. That's the kind of thinking that gets people disappeared. Just do your job. File your reports. Keep people away from the dangerous areas. That's all we can do. But he was wrong. There was more we could do. We could warn people. Really warn them. We could document everything. Build a case even the Forest Service couldn't ignore. We could stop pretending bear attacks explain the unexplainable. Or we could keep playing our parts. Rangers in towers, watching the wilderness swallow people whole, and writing reports that blamed the wind. Waiting for the lake to drop another foot, another yard, until whatever the Kootenai people knew had to be contained finally broke free. I spent the rest of the night transcribing David Crenshaw's words, trying to make sense of his transformation. By dawn, I had a theory, not a comfortable one, but one that fit the facts. What if Bigfoot wasn't a species? What if it was what happened when humans went too deep, saw too much, touched something that had been buried for good reason? What if every sighting was someone like David, caught between what they were and what they were becoming? And what if the lake, the artificial lake created in a very specific place at a very specific time, wasn't just hiding a cave? What if it was a quarantine, flooding something that should never have been exposed to air again? The water was dropping. Every year a little more. And with each inch lost, things got worse. More sightings, more disappearances, more David Crenshaws walking out of the wilderness, fighting to hold on to humanity while something ancient rewrote their DNA. I looked out at Misquaw Lake, red in the morning sun. Somewhere beneath its surface, in caves that had been sealed for a reason, something waited. And I was beginning to understand that my job wasn't just to watch for forest fires and lost hikers. I was here to watch the water level, to document what emerged, to maintain the fiction, until the fiction became impossible to maintain. And then I supposed, I would become another missing ranger, another mysterious transfer, another cautionary tale whispered over radios in the dark. Unless I found a way to stop it, unless the network of voices in the wilderness, Roy, Martina, Jinsu, and all the others who knew the truth could find a solution before the lake gave up its secrets completely. The radio hissed static. In the white noise I could swear I heard whispers. Not English. Not any language that belonged in this century, but getting clearer every day, like something learning to speak again after a very long silence. Time was running out. For all of us. The email came through during my monthly supply run to town. Sender Dr. Yuki Tanaka. Wildlife Biology Department, University of British Columbia. Subject invitation, unofficial wildlife management conference. Ranger. Your recent reports have caught the attention of our research group. We're hosting a gathering of field personnel who have encountered anomalous wildlife patterns in the Northern Rockies. Off the record. October 15, 17. Fernie, BC. Interested? Tanaka. I sat in my truck outside the Whitefish grocery store, staring at my phone. My official reports contained nothing unusual. Bear sightings, trail conditions, standard wilderness management. But someone had been reading between the lines. Or maybe they'd found the forum. Or maybe there were more watchers than I'd realized, documenting the undocumentable. Roy thought it was a trap. Government honeypot, he said over the radio. They're looking for leakers, people who know too much. But Martina had received the same invitation, and Jinsu, and a dozen others from the network. We cross-referenced, verified. Dr. Tanaka was real, published, respected. Her official research focused on apex predator behavior. Her unofficial research, we discovered, went much deeper. I requested 3 days leave. Rebecca approved without question. She encouraged her rangers to attend professional development opportunities. If she knew the real nature of the conference, she didn't let on. October 15 came cold and gray. I drove north, crossing into Canada at the Rooseville port of entry. The border guard barely glanced at my passport. Just another ranger heading to a conference. Nothing to see here. Fernie nestled in a valley between peaks already dusted with snow. The conference venue was a closed ski lodge 5 miles out of town. Summer season over, winter not yet begun. Perfect isolation for conversations that couldn't happen officially. The parking lot told a story. Government trucks from both sides of the border. Personal vehicles with wilderness permits in the windows. A few rentals that screamed academic. I counted 37 vehicles. 37 people who'd seen things that didn't fit in reports. Inside, Dr. Tanaka had transformed the lodge's main hall into a briefing room. Maps covered the walls, not tourist maps, but detailed topographical surveys marked with red pins. Dozens of them, clustered along the spine of the Rockies from Colorado to Alaska, a pattern I recognized but had never seen laid out so starkly. "Thank you all for coming," Dr. Tanaka began. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of intensity that comes from chasing impossible truths. "I know the risk you're taking by being here. Your careers, your credibility, potentially more. But the situation has escalated beyond what any of us can handle alone." She clicked a remote. The projection screen showed a graph. Reported disappearances in designated wilderness areas, 1990 to present. A steady line that suddenly spiked in 2020, climbing sharper each year. Click. Unexplained wildlife sightings, same period. The same spike. Click. Seismic activity in regions with no known fault lines. Again the pattern. Click. Water table changes in artificial lakes created between 1920 and... "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "we are not dealing with isolated incidents. We're dealing with a coordinated emergence of something that's been contained for the better part of a century, and that containment is failing." A hand went up. I recognized the voice, Declan from Bob Marshall. "You're saying someone knew, in the 1920s, knew what needed to be contained and how." The evidence suggests a massive engineering project disguised as infrastructure development. Dams built where no dams were needed. Valleys flooded with no clear purpose. Rail lines rerouted at enormous expense. All between 1923 and 1926, all in areas with specific geological features. She clicked again. Cave systems. Every flooded valley sat above extensive limestone caverns. Every one. But why? Someone asked. What were they containing? Dr. Tanaka paused. That's where first-hand accounts become crucial. How many of you have encountered subjects exhibiting physical transformation? 14 hands went up. More than I'd expected. Apparent human origins? Same 14. And how many have noticed these transformed subjects demonstrate knowledge of the cave systems? Every hand stayed up. Dr. Tanaka nodded grimly. Then you've all encountered what the original engineers called the infected. Not a disease in any conventional sense, but something that rewrites human biology at the cellular level. Something that was endemic to these cave systems and had to be sealed away. A woman I didn't recognize stood up. Park Service uniform. New Mexico plates on her truck. I've got 3 of them on trail cams in the Sangre de Cristos. Used to be people I've matched missing persons reports. Now they're transitional. Still partially human during daylight, fully transformed at night. They're drawn to the old mine shafts, trying to dig down to something. Same in Colorado, another voice added. The Hayman fire exposed some old tunnels. We've had 4 transformations since then. All people who explored those tunnels before we could seal them. I thought about David Crenshaw, his body reshaping itself in the moonlight. What's down there? What's causing the transformation? Dr. Tanaka changed slides. Ancient pictographs, petroglyphs, cave paintings from across the Americas, all showing the same thing. Tall figures with distorted proportions, surrounded by smaller human shapes. Some images showed the transformation itself, humans approaching the tall figures, changing, becoming. Every indigenous group in the Rockies has stories about the first giants, she said. Beings that were here before humans, that went underground when the ice came. The stories are remarkably consistent. Don't go deep, don't drink the red water, don't listen when the earth speaks. But we're not talking about mythology. Jinsu interjected. I've got tissue samples. This is biological. Is it? Dr. Tanaka asked. Or is it something that exists at the intersection of biology and something else? Something our science doesn't have words for yet? The room erupted in discussion. Scientists arguing with field rangers. Skeptics challenging believers. Everyone trying to make sense of the impossible. But through it all, a pattern emerged. We weren't just random observers. We were a network, each holding pieces of a larger puzzle. Dr. Tanaka let the discussion run, then called for order. I've brought you all here for a reason. The containment is failing. The lakes are dropping. The transformed are increasing in number and boldness. And the government response on both sides of the border has been to suppress and deny. She clicked to a new slide. Classified markings, partially redacted. This was leaked to me by a source at NORAD. They're tracking the transformed by satellite, have been for years. They know, they've always known. And their solution is to let wilderness areas serve as buffer zones while they figure out a permanent solution. What kind of solution? Roy asked. The kind that involves evacuating populations from a 200-mile corridor along the Continental Divide. Stunned silence. They're going to write off the Rockies, someone whispered. Declare them uninhabitable. Unless, Dr. Tanaka said, we can find another way. The original engineers in the 1920s found a method of containment that worked for a century. If we can understand what they did, how they did it, maybe we can repair or improve their solution. She assigned working groups, geological surveys to map the cave systems, biological analysis of transformation patterns, historical research into the 1920s engineering projects, field observation of behavioral patterns. I was assigned to field observation, along with Roy and Martina. Our job document the transformed, their movements, their apparent goals. Dangerous work, but we were the ones with the most first-hand experience. That night, we gathered in smaller groups, sharing stories too strange, even for this strange conference. I told them about Misquah Lake, about the structures beneath the water, about David Crenshaw's transformation. Others shared worse. Whole families changed, remote communities gone silent, things in the deep woods that had never been human at all. There's a pattern to the transformations, observed Dr. Marcus Webb, a geneticist from Calgary. It's not random. The change follows bloodlines, affects some families more readily than others, like there's a genetic predisposition, a dormant trait that the caves activate, which would explain why indigenous peoples developed such strong taboos, added Dr. Sarah Crow-Feather, an anthropologist from the University of Montana. Generations of selection pressure. Those who avoided the caves survived unchanged. Those who didn't became the giants in the stories. Roy finished. We worked through the night, pooling knowledge, building a database of sightings, transformations, patterns. By dawn, we had the beginnings of understanding. Not complete, not even close, but more than any of us had possessed alone. Dr. Tanaka gathered us for a final briefing. You return to your posts with a mission. Document everything. Share through encrypted channels. Build the case for action before it's too late. And above all, stay safe. They're watching us now, the transformed and the government both. Be careful who you trust. I drove back to Kiyuhana Forest with a laptop full of encrypted files and a head full of terrible knowledge. The conference had given me hope. We weren't alone. We weren't crazy. We had a chance. But it had also confirmed my worst fears. The situation was deteriorating faster than anyone imagined. 2 days after I returned to Cabin 4, the reports started coming in. Dr. Webb, killed in a car accident outside Calgary. Dr. Crow-Feather, missing on a routine hike. 3 other conference attendees, gone in a week. They're cleaning house, Roy said over the radio. Someone leaked the conference. We're all targets now. I looked out at Misquah Lake, its surface placid in the autumn light. Beneath the water, structures older than human memory waited. In the caves below, something that could rewrite our species at the molecular level stirred. And somewhere in the bureaucratic machinery of government, decisions were being made about who would be sacrificed to keep the secret. But we had something they didn't expect. A network of witnesses, armed with knowledge and determination. We would document. We would resist. We would find the truth about what lay beneath these mountains and why it was waking up. The radio crackled with static. Through the white noise, I heard it again. Whispers in no language meant for human throats. Getting stronger, getting closer. Time was running out faster than any of us had imagined. November brought the first real snows, and with them a temporary reprieve. The transformed seemed to retreat deeper into the wilderness when the temperature dropped, their movements sluggish, their hunts less frequent, but I knew better than to trust the quiet. Winter was when they planned. I'd been documenting everything, following the protocols we'd established at the conference. Encrypted files uploaded to secure servers whenever I made it to town. Dead drops of physical evidence, hair samples, castings of tracks, photographs, predetermined coordinates for Dr. Tanaka's surviving team to collect. The network had shrunk. Of the 37 who'd attended the conference, 9 were confirmed dead, 6 missing. The rest of us worked in isolation, connected only by encrypted messages and coded radio transmissions. We were archaeologists of the impossible, racing to understand something ancient before it fully awakened. Then came the message that changed everything. It arrived via Jinsu, relayed through 3 intermediaries to avoid detection. A Forest Service worker in Waterton had found something, documents from the 1924 operation, hidden in an abandoned ranger station scheduled for demolition, original engineering plans, notebooks from the team that had sealed the caves, and most importantly, a map showing all the sites, not just the ones that had been flooded. There are unsealed entrances. Jinsu's message read, they couldn't flood them all. Some they collapsed. Some they sealed with concrete. But 3 they just left, marked as observation points. One is 4 miles from your location. I found it on the topographical map. A box canyon on the north face of Kishinin Mountain. Accessible only by game trails. No official paths led there. No camping permits were issued for that area. It was a blank spot in the wilderness, forgotten or deliberately ignored. The smart thing would have been to report it, to wait for backup, to approach with a full team. But teams attracted attention. And after what happened to the conference attendees, I trusted no one except the voices on the radio. I prepared carefully. Full winter gear, emergency supplies for 3 days. Weapons both conventional and improvised. I told Rebecca I was doing a backcountry patrol, checking trap lines for poachers. Routine work, nothing unusual. The hike took 6 hours through deepening snow. No tracks preceded me, human or otherwise. The forest grew denser as I climbed, old growth that had never seen logging, trees that remembered when the Steyeha walked openly under the stars. I smelled the canyon before I saw it, a metallic tang in the air like copper and ozone. The trees thinned, revealing a narrow cleft in the mountain face. And there, just as the documents had shown, was the entrance. Not a natural cave mouth, but a constructed portal. Concrete and steel from the 1920s, now weathered and cracked, but still standing. The metal door hung open, its locks long since corroded. Above it, carved into the concrete, words in English and French. Observation Post 3, authorized personnel only, extreme danger. I stood at the threshold, flashlight beam penetrating only a few feet into the darkness beyond. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back. But David Crenshaw's transformed face haunted me. The missing families haunted me. The knowledge that something was spreading, changing people, and our only defense was ignorance, that haunted me most of all. I entered the cave. The tunnel was artificial for the first 100 feet. Concrete lined with rusted fixtures that might once have held lights or instruments. Then it opened into natural limestone. Vast chambers connected by narrow passages. My flashlight beam couldn't find the ceiling in some places. The walls were covered in petroglyphs, but not the usual indigenous art I'd studied. These were different, geometric patterns that seemed to move in peripheral vision, symbols that made my eyes water to look at directly, and everywhere the sound of dripping water, though I could see no moisture on the walls. I followed the main passage, marking my path with chalk. The temperature rose as I descended, from winter cold to something almost tropical. The air grew thick, humid, with that same metallic taste. My compass spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. Then I heard the whispers. Not the static-shrouded hints from the radio, but clear voices speaking in unison. The language was nothing I recognized. Clicks and harmonics that human throats shouldn't be able to produce. But underneath, like a translation running parallel, I could almost understand. They were calling, summoning, inviting. I rounded a corner and froze. The chamber beyond defied geology. The walls were worked stone, carved into impossible angles that created optical illusions. The floor sloped down to a pool of water that glowed faintly red in my flashlight beam. And standing at the water's edge, their backs to me, were 3 figures. 2 I recognized from missing persons reports, hikers who'd vanished over the summer. The third was Marcus Weatherby. They were naked, skin pale as cavefish, bodies elongated in ways that spoke of ongoing transformation. They stood perfectly still, facing the pool, whispering in that alien harmony. "Weatherby?" My voice cracked. He turned slowly, and I bit back a scream. His face was still recognizably human, but stretched, features rearranged to accommodate eyes that had grown too large, a mouth that opened too wide. When he smiled, I saw rows of teeth like a shark's. "You came," he said, his voice a discordant blend of human speech and something else. "Good. The record must be complete. Someone must witness." Witness what? The awakening. The return. The correction of a very old mistake. He gestured to the pool. "They sleep down there in the deep places. The first children of this continent. We imprisoned them with water and stone, but water recedes and stone cracks. They're waking up. The giants. The Stayha, names given by those who feared them. They are the opposite of monsters. They are what we were meant to become, what some of us are becoming again." He touched his transformed face with fingers that had grown webbed and clawed. Evolution interrupted, now resuming. The other two figures turned. Their transformation was further along. Barely human anymore. All angles and impossible proportions. One opened its mouth and spoke in that clicking language. Weatherby nodded. "She says you're not ready. Your genetics are incompatible. You would not survive the change." "A pity. But you can still serve a purpose." "What purpose?" "Documentation. Truth. An end to the lies that keep humanity small and frightened." He moved closer. His gait a disturbing blend of human walking and something quadrupedal. "We tried to warn them, you know. Tried to document what we found. But they silenced us. Transferred us. Discredited us. So we went deeper. Found the source." He gestured to the pool again. In its red depths I glimpsed movement. Massive forms stirring in flooded caverns far below. "The water table drops 2 inches every year," Weatherby continued. "In 5 years, maybe 10. The deep chambers will drain. They'll emerge not as scattered individuals, but as a civilization. And those of us who've changed will be their ambassadors, their translators, their children." "You're talking about the end of humanity." "No, the beginning of what comes next. Homo sapiens was always a transitional species. We just forgot what we were transitioning to." I backed toward the entrance, weapon drawn but knowing it was useless. Weatherby and the others watched with those two large eyes, making no move to stop me. "Run," Weatherby said. "Tell them what you've seen. Add your voice to the warnings they won't heed. Document the truth they'll deny. And when the waters recede and the earth opens and the first giants walk under the sun again, remember that you were offered a choice." I ran. Through the tunnels, past the petroglyphs that seemed to writhe on the walls, out into the blessed cold of winter. I didn't stop until I reached my truck. Didn't feel safe until I was back in the illusory security of cabin 4. That night I uploaded everything. Photos, videos, audio recordings. I wrote a report that laid out the truth in stark, undeniable terms. The transformation wasn't random. It was purposeful. And what lay beneath the mountains wasn't a species but a civilization waiting to reclaim its world. The response came within hours. Not from Dr. Tanaka or the network, but from numbers I didn't recognize. Cease and desist orders. Threats of prosecution under the Espionage Act. Warnings about the consequences of spreading panic. Then Rebecca called. Her voice was tired, defeated. "They're transferring you. Effective immediately. Report to Yellowstone for reassignment. Someone will be by tomorrow to collect your files. All of them." A pause. All the official ones. The message was clear. I had 12 hours to hide what mattered, to ensure the truth survived even if I didn't. I worked through the night, creating caches, uploading to servers that didn't officially exist, encoding coordinates in seemingly innocent trail reports. Dawn came red over Misquah Lake. As I packed, I saw them on the far shore. 3 figures, tall and wrong, watching, waiting. They raised their hands in what might have been farewell or warning. I left cabin 4 as the recovery team arrived. Black SUVs with government plates and men who didn't give names. They searched the cabin thoroughly, found nothing but standard reports and equipment. The real documentation was already dispersed, carried by other voices in the wilderness, other witnesses to the impossible. My new posting was in the gift shop at Old Faithful, about as far from real wilderness as you could get while still wearing a ranger uniform. But even there, I heard the whispers. Rangers talking about strange sightings in the backcountry. Tourists reporting sounds in the night that didn't match any known wildlife. The transformation was spreading beyond the northern Rockies, following cave systems that connected in ways our maps didn't show. I write this from a motel room in Bozeman, having finally left the Forest Service after 18 months of enforced silence. Others from the network have gone underground, continuing the documentation, preparing for what's coming. Some, like Roy and Martina, have disappeared. Whether silenced or transformed, I don't know. The water continues to drop. The whispers grow louder. And somewhere in the deep places, giants stir in their sleep, dreaming of the sun they haven't seen in millennia. Weatherby was right about one thing. Someone must witness. Someone must record the truth, even if that truth is the end of one world and the beginning of another. So I write, and I remember, and I wait. Because the Stehi are coming, not as monsters or myths, but as the inheritors of a world we only borrowed. And those of us who remain human can only watch and document and hope that somewhere in the transition, something of what we were survives. The transformation has begun. There is no stopping it now. Only the question remains. Will you go to the caves willingly, or will you wait until the caves come to you? I've made my choice. I'm heading back north, back to the mountains, back to where it all started. Not to fight or investigate or document anymore, just to witness, to be present at the end and the beginning. If you find this account, you'll know what's coming. Look for the red water. Listen for the whispers. And remember, we had our time in the sun. Now it's their turn. The crisp autumn air filled my lungs as I stepped out of my car, stretching after the long drive into the Navajo Nation. The sun was setting, painting the sky in vibrant oranges and purples that reflected off the red rocks surrounding me. I had driven for hours to reach this remote campsite, seeking solitude and a chance to reconnect with nature. As I unloaded my gear, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced around, seeing nothing but the vast expanse of desert and the looming forest beyond. Shrugging off the sensation, I chalked it up to city nerves adjusting to the wilderness. I had always been drawn to the outdoors, but this trip was different. For months I had been researching Native American folklore, particularly the legends of the Skinwalker. These shape-shifting creatures fascinated and terrified me in equal measure. The Navajo people spoke of them in hushed tones, evil witches who could take on the form of animals at will. As I set up my tent, I recalled the warnings I'd received from the locals in the last town I'd passed through. "Don't go out there alone," an old woman had cautioned, her eyes clouded with cataracts but still sharp with fear. "The land is sacred, and it doesn't take kindly to outsiders." But I was here for precisely that reason. To understand, to experience, perhaps even to catch a glimpse of the inexplicable. I had convinced myself that the legends were just that, legends. Yet as the shadows lengthened, and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, I couldn't help but feel a shiver of apprehension. With my camp established, I sat by the small fire I'd built, warming my hands and listening to the sounds of the night. Coyotes howled in the distance, their eerie calls echoing across the landscape. The wind whispered through the juniper trees, carrying with it the scent of sage and dust. As I prepared a simple meal of canned beans and jerky, I pulled out my journal, jotting down my initial impressions and the strange sense of unease that had settled over me. I had always been a skeptic, but something about this place made me question my certainties. Day 1, I wrote. Arrived at camp just before sunset. The area is beautiful, but there's an undeniable tension in the air. It feels as if the land itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I paused, pen hovering over the page, as a twig snapped somewhere in the darkness beyond my fire's glow. My head jerked up, eyes straining to penetrate the gloom. For a moment, I thought I saw a pair of eyes reflecting the firelight, but when I blinked, they were gone. Heart pounding. I closed my journal and quickly finished my meal. As I cleaned up, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made a terrible mistake in coming here alone. The stories I had dismissed as superstition suddenly felt all too real. As I zipped myself into my sleeping bag, I tried to rationalize my fears. This was just an unfamiliar environment, and my imagination was running wild. Tomorrow, in the light of day, everything would seem less ominous. But sleep eluded me. Every rustle of leaves, Every distant animal cry had me sitting up, straining my ears. And then, just as exhaustion was finally starting to overtake me, I heard it, a sound that made my blood freeze in my veins. It was a laugh, but not a human laugh. It was high-pitched, almost a cackle, with an undercurrent of menace that made my skin crawl. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing off the rocks and through the trees. I lay there paralyzed with fear as the laughter faded away, leaving behind a silence more terrifying than any sound. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I was not alone in these woods. Something was out there, something that defied rational explanation. As the first light of dawn began to seep into my tent, I finally drifted into a fitful sleep, haunted by dreams of shadowy figures that moved with inhuman grace and eyes that glowed with an otherworldly light. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the world, and the thin veil that separates reality from the realm of legend. I awoke to the sound of birds chirping, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. As the events of the previous night came rushing back, I sat up abruptly, my heart racing. The morning light filtering through the tent walls seemed to mock my nocturnal fears, and I chided myself for letting my imagination run wild. Unzipping the tent, I stepped out into the crisp morning air. The campsite looked peaceful, untouched by whatever terrors my mind had conjured in the dark. I stretched, feeling my muscles protest after a night of fitful sleep. As I moved to start a fire for breakfast, something caught my eye. There, in the soft dirt near my tent, was a set of tracks. My breath caught in my throat as I knelt to examine them. They were unlike anything I had ever seen before, too large for a coyote, but not quite right for a wolf or a mountain lion. The shape was all wrong, almost as if... I shook my head, refusing to complete the thought. There had to be a logical explanation. Perhaps it was just a trick of the light, or maybe I was seeing patterns where none existed. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that settled in the pit of my stomach. Trying to distract myself, I busied myself with breakfast and planning the day's hike. I had come here to explore, after all, and I was determined not to let my overactive imagination ruin the trip. As I packed my day pack, I hesitated before adding my camera. Part of me wanted to document the strange tracks, but another part feared what else I might capture on film. In the end, curiosity won out, and I slipped the camera in alongside my water and trail mix. The sun was climbing higher as I set out, following a faint trail that wound its way through the juniper and pinyon pines. The scent of sage filled the air, and for a while I lost myself in the simple pleasure of the hike. But as the day wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every rustle in the underbrush, every shadow that moved in the corner of my eye, set my nerves on edge. More than once I spun around, certain I would catch a glimpse of whatever was stalking me, only to find nothing but empty trail behind me. It was mid-afternoon when I stumbled upon the cave. Half hidden by a tumble of rocks, it gaped like a wound in the red sandstone cliff face. Something about it drew me in, a pull I couldn't quite explain. As I approached, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The air around the cave entrance felt different, heavier, charged with an energy I couldn't name. Against my better judgment, I clicked on my flashlight and stepped inside. The beam of light revealed ancient petroglyphs carved into the cave walls. Most were familiar, figures of men and animals, hunting scenes, and symbols I recognized from my research. But one image made me gasp out loud. There, etched into the stone with unmistakable clarity, was a figure that could only be described as a man transforming into an animal. The head was elongated, caught between human and canine, and the body was twisted in an impossible contortion. With shaking hands, I raised my camera and snapped a photo. The flash illuminated the cave for a split second, and in that moment I swear I saw something move in the shadows at the back of the cave. Panic seized me and I bolted, not stopping until I was back in the sunlight, gasping for air. As my heart rate slowly returned to normal, I tried to make sense of what I had seen. Was it just a trick of the light? Or had I stumbled upon something that was never meant to be found? With trembling fingers, I checked the photo on my camera. The petroglyph was there, clear as day, but in the background, barely visible in the shadows, was a pair of glowing eyes. The sun was beginning to set as I made my way back to camp, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for me with grasping fingers. The events at the cave had left me shaken, and every snapping twig or rustling leaf had me jumping. As I approached my campsite, I noticed something was off. At first, I couldn't put my finger on it, but then I realized my tent was open. I was certain I had zipped it closed before leaving that morning. Heart pounding, I approached cautiously. Nothing seemed to be missing, but my belongings had been rifled through, sleeping bag unzipped and backpack contents strewn about. As I began to clean up, a glint of something caught my eye. There, half buried in the dirt, was a small silver pendant. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand. It was intricately carved with symbols I didn't recognize, warm to the touch despite the cool evening air. As I examined it, a gust of wind whipped through the camp, carrying with it what sounded like whispered words in a language I didn't understand. I spun around, searching for the source, but I was alone. Or was I? The pendant seemed to grow heavier in my hand, and for a moment I could have sworn I saw the symbols shimmer and change. Unnerved, I slipped it into my pocket, unsure of what to do with it but certain I couldn't leave it behind. As night fell, I built up the fire, hoping its light would keep at bay whatever was lurking in the darkness. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled into something far beyond my understanding, something ancient and dangerous. I tried to distract myself by reviewing the photos I had taken that day. The image of the petroglyph was clear, the transforming figure etched in stark relief against the cave wall. But as I zoomed in on those glowing eyes in the background, a chill ran down my spine. They seemed to stare back at me from the small screen, filled with an intelligence that was decidedly not animal. A branch snapped in the darkness beyond the fire's glow, and I nearly dropped the camera. I peered into the night, straining to see what was out there. For a moment, I thought I saw a tall, elongated silhouette at the edge of the trees, but when I blinked, it was gone. Sleep was out of the question. I sat by the fire, jumping at every sound, the pendant a constant weight in my pocket. As the hours crept by, I found myself humming under my breath, an old Navajo protection song I had learned during my research. Whether it was actually keeping anything at bay or just soothing my frayed nerves, I couldn't say. Just before dawn, as the sky began to lighten, I heard it again, that high, inhuman laugh that had terrified me the first night. This time, though, it was closer, much closer, and it was answered by another laugh, then another, until the air was filled with a cacophony of otherworldly mirth. As the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon, the laughter abruptly ceased, leaving behind a silence so profound it seemed to ring in my ears. I sat there shaking, as the new day dawned, wondering what horrors it would bring. As soon as it was light enough, I broke camp, my hands shaking as I packed up my gear. I couldn't stay here another night, that much was clear. But as I shouldered my backpack and prepared to hike out, I realized I couldn't leave either, not without answers. I decided to head to the nearest Navajo community, hoping to find someone who could shed light on what was happening. The hike took most of the morning, and by the time I reached the small cluster of houses, the sun was high in the sky. An old man sat in front of one of the houses, his weathered face creased with lines of wisdom and sorrow. As I approached, his dark eyes seemed to look right through me, and I had the unsettling feeling that he knew exactly why I was there. "You've seen them, haven't you?" he said without preamble, his voice gravelly with age. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He sighed heavily, gesturing for me to sit beside him. I told them not to let outsiders camp in that area. It's not safe. The veil is thin there, and they walk freely. They, I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. The skinwalkers, he replied, his voice dropping to a whisper. Yinald Lushi, the ones who walk on all fours. I pulled the silver pendant from my pocket, holding it out to him. I found this at my campsite. Do you know what it means? The old man recoiled as if I'd offered him a venomous snake. Where did you get that? He demanded, his eyes wide with fear. I explained about the intruder in my tent, the whispers on the wind. With each word, the elder's face grew graver. You've been marked, he said finally. The pendant is an invitation, and a trap. They're trying to lure you in, to make you one of them. A chill ran down my spine. How? Why me? The old man shook his head. The ways of the skinwalkers are ancient and evil. They seek to corrupt, to twist the natural order. And they are always looking for new blood. He leaned in close, his voice urgent. Listen carefully. You must leave this place immediately. Go back to where you came from and never return. Salt your doorways, burn sage, and whatever you do, do not look back. But what about the pendant? I asked, still holding the silver token. Leave it here, he said. I will dispose of it properly. But know this, even without it, they may still come for you. The skinwalkers do not give up easily once they've chosen a target. As I stood to leave, the old man grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. Remember, he said, his eyes boring into mine, if you hear your name called in the night, do not answer. If you see a loved one in the distance, do not approach. And if you feel the urge to look behind you, resist with all your might, for once you acknowledge them, they can take you. I thanked him, my mind reeling from everything I'd learned. As I turned to go, he called out one last warning. The journey back is when you'll be most vulnerable. They'll try to confuse you, to make you doubt your senses. Stay on the path, no matter what you see or hear, and may the holy people protect you. With those ominous words ringing in my ears, I set out for my car, hoping against hope that I could outrun the terror that seemed to be closing in from all sides. The sun was already low in the sky by the time I reached my car. Every instinct screamed at me to jump in and drive away as fast as I could, but I knew better than to travel these roads at night. Reluctantly, I decided to spend one more night in the area, this time at a small motel just off the reservation. As I checked in, the desk clerk gave me an odd look. You okay, mister? You look like you've seen a ghost. I forced a laugh, trying to sound casual. Just a long day of hiking. I'll be fine after a good night's sleep. But sleep was the furthest thing from my mind as I locked myself in the small, musty room. I salted the doorway and windows as the old man had instructed, and burned the small bundle of sage I had in my pack. The pungent smoke filled the room, and I hoped it would be enough to keep any malevolent forces at bay. As night fell, I huddled on the bed, every sense on high alert. The hours crept by, marked only by the flickering of the neon vacancy sign outside my window and the occasional passing car on the distant highway. Just after midnight I heard it, a soft scratching at my door. At first I tried to convince myself it was just the wind, or maybe a stray animal. But then it came again, more insistent this time, accompanied by a low guttural growl that was decidedly not from any animal I knew. I held my breath, praying that whatever was out there would go away. The scratching intensified, and then, to my horror, I heard a voice, my voice, calling from outside. Hello? Is anyone there? I need help. Every instinct screamed at me to open the door, to help this other me that sounded so lost and afraid. But the old man's warning echoed in my mind, and I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay put. The voice called again, more desperate this time, but I squeezed my eyes shut and began to recite every prayer I could remember, in English, in Navajo, in half-remembered Latin from my Catholic school days. I'm not sure how long I sat there, shaking and praying, but eventually the scratching stopped, and the voice faded away. When I finally dared to open my eyes, watery sunlight was seeping through the curtains. I was out of the room and in my car before the sun had fully risen, driving east as fast as I dared on the winding desert roads. But my ordeal was far from over. As I drove, the landscape seemed to shift and change around me. More than once I could have sworn I saw impossible things out of the corner of my eye. A tree bending to look at me as I passed. A rock formation that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at it. Shadows that ran alongside my car, keeping pace even at 60 miles an hour. And always, the feeling of being watched, of being pursued by something just beyond the limits of my perception. I drove for hours, stopping only when absolutely necessary for gas or a quick bathroom break. Each time I left the relative safety of my car, I felt exposed, vulnerable. I swore I could hear that high, cackling laugh on the wind, growing closer with each passing mile. As night began to fall again, I realized with growing dread that I had somehow gotten turned around. The landmarks weren't right, the roads unfamiliar. Panic began to set in, as I understood that I was lost, my sense of direction completely skewed. I pulled over, trying to get my bearings, when movement in my rearview mirror caught my eye. There, in the gathering gloom, was a figure, tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed too long and jointed in all the wrong places. It was still far behind me, but it was moving with a speed that defied logic, eating up the distance between us. With a strangled cry, I threw the car into gear and floored it, no longer caring about the twisting road or the deepening night. All that mattered was putting as much distance as possible between me and that nightmarish figure. As I drove, more shapes emerged from the darkness, running alongside my car. I caught glimpses of twisted faces, of eyes that glowed with an unholy light, of teeth too sharp and numerous to be natural. They kept pace effortlessly, no matter how fast I drove. I don't know how long I fled through the night. My world narrowed to the cone of my headlights and the horrors that lurked just beyond. But as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, I saw something that made me sob with relief, a sign for the interstate. As I merged onto the highway, pointing my car towards home and civilization, I finally dared to look in my rearview mirror again. The road behind me was empty, the desert innocent and calm in the morning light. But I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that this wasn't over. The skinwalkers had marked me, and no matter how far I ran, a part of me would always be looking over my shoulder, wondering when they would come for me again. The weeks following my return home were a blur of sleepless nights and paranoid days. I jumped at every shadow, flinched at every unexpected sound. My friends and family noticed the change in me, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them what had happened. Who would believe me? I threw myself into research, spending countless hours poring over books on Navajo folklore and the history of skinwalker legends. I scoured the internet for similar accounts, for any shred of information that might help me understand what I had experienced. But the more I learned, the more terrified I became. The stories I found were nightmarish. Tales of people driven mad by their encounters, of entire families disappearing without a trace, of curses that spanned generations. One night, about a month after my return, I woke to the sound of scratching at my bedroom window. My heart nearly stopped as I saw a shadowy figure silhouetted against the glass. But when I blinked, it was gone, leaving me to wonder if it had ever been there at all. These incidents continued, growing more frequent and more intense. Sometimes it was just a feeling of being watched. Other times it was more overt. Claw marks on my door that hadn't been there the night before. Strange tracks in the mud of my garden. That same high, inhuman laughter echoing through my house in the dead of night. I began to withdraw from my friends and family, afraid that whatever was haunting me might target them as well. I lost my job. My relationships crumbled, but I hardly noticed. All my energy was focused on trying to protect myself from an enemy I couldn't see or understand. It was during this dark time that I received an unexpected visitor. I was startled by a knock at my door one evening. Cautiously, I peered through the peephole to see an elderly Navajo woman standing on my porch. Something about her seemed familiar, though I was certain we'd never met. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. The woman's eyes were kind, but filled with a deep sadness. "You are the one who encountered the Yainald Lushi," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, unable to speak. She sighed heavily. "I am Sarah Begay. The man you spoke to on the reservation, he was my brother. He passed away shortly after your visit." A chill ran down my spine. "I'm so sorry," I managed to say. Sarah shook her head. "Do not be sorry. He knew his time was coming. But before he died, he made me promise to find you, to help you if I could." I invited her in, my mind reeling. As we sat in my living room, Sarah began to speak, her voice low and urgent. "What you encountered out there, it's part of something much bigger, much older than you can imagine. The skinwalkers are real, yes, but they're just one piece of a larger puzzle." She went on to explain that the land where I had camped was once the site of an ancient battle between forces of good and evil. The skinwalkers, she said, were drawn to places where the veil between worlds was thin, feeding off the residual energy of past conflicts. "But why me?" I asked. "Why did they choose to target me?" Sarah's eyes met mine, and I saw a flicker of something, recognition, in their depths. "Sometimes," she said slowly, "the skinwalkers don't choose their targets at random. Sometimes they're drawn to those who have a connection to this land, to its history, even if that connection isn't immediately apparent." She reached into her bag and pulled out an old weathered journal. "This belonged to my grandfather," she said, holding it out to me. "I think you need to read it." As I took the journal, a sense of déjà vu washed over me. The leather cover felt familiar under my fingers, as if I'd held it before. "Read it," Sarah urged. "And when you're done, come find me. There's more you need to know." With that cryptic message, she left, leaving me alone with the journal and a growing sense that my encounter with the Skinwalkers was just the beginning of a much larger, more terrifying story. The journal Sarah had given me was filled with accounts of Skinwalker encounters, rituals to ward them off, and theories about their origins. But it was a passage near the end that made my blood run cold. October 15th, 1945. I fear my past has finally caught up with me. The choices I made during the war, the things I did in the name of science, they've opened a door that cannot be closed. The Skinwalkers hunt me now, punishment for my hubris. May the holy people forgive me, and may my descendants be spared the consequences of my actions. The entry was signed Dr. James Hawthorne, my grandfather's name. Memories came flooding back. Stories my father had told me about his own father, a brilliant scientist who had worked on classified government projects during World War II. He had disappeared under mysterious circumstances when my father was just a boy. With shaking hands, I continued reading. The final pages of the journal detailed my grandfather's desperate attempts to protect his family from the curse he believed he had brought upon them. He wrote of ancient Navajo rituals, of deals made with forces beyond human understanding. The last entry simply read, "I go now to face what I have wrought. May this sacrifice be enough to spare those who come after me." As I closed the journal, pieces began to fall into place. The strange pull I had felt towards that particular camping spot, the way the Skinwalkers had seemed to single me out, it wasn't random at all. I was paying for the sins of my ancestors. With a growing sense of urgency, I packed a bag and headed out to find Sarah. I needed answers, and I had a feeling she was the only one who could provide them. The drive back to Navajo land felt different this time. The landscape seemed to whisper secrets, the wind carrying echoes of the past. As I neared the small community where I had first met the old man, Sarah's brother, I felt a shift in the air, as if I was crossing some invisible threshold. I found Sarah's house easily enough, guided by some instinct I couldn't explain. She was waiting for me on the porch, as if she had known exactly when I would arrive. "You've read it," she said as I approached. It wasn't a question. I nodded, my mind swirling with questions. "My grandfather, what did he do? What door did he open?" Sarah's eyes were sad as she gestured for me to sit beside her. "Your grandfather was part of a secret government program," she began. "They were experimenting with ancient Native American rituals, trying to weaponize them for the war effort." She went on to explain how my grandfather and his team had attempted to summon and control Skinwalkers, believing they could be used as supernatural soldiers. But the ritual had gone horribly wrong, unleashing forces they couldn't hope to contain. "The Skinwalkers that hunt you now," Sarah said, "they're not just after you. They're trying to finish what was started all those years ago. Your grandfather's sacrifice bought time, but the balance is shifting again." I felt the weight of generations pressing down on me. "What can I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Sarah's hand found mine, her grip surprisingly strong. "You have a choice to make," she said. "You can run, try to hide from your legacy, or you can face it head on, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to set things right." As night fell around us, Sarah began to teach me the old ways, protection rituals, words of power, the true names of things that lurked in the shadows. And as I learned, I felt something awakening inside me, a connection to this land and its spirits that had always been there, dormant until now. I knew then that there was no turning back. The path ahead was dark and fraught with danger, but it was my path to walk. The sins of the father had become the burden of the son, and I was determined to face whatever came next. The next few months were a whirlwind of preparation. Under Sarah's guidance, I immersed myself in Navajo spirituality and lore. I learned to sing the ancient songs, to craft protective talismans, to see beyond the veil of ordinary reality. But even as I grew stronger, so did the forces arrayed against me. The Skinwalker attacks intensified, becoming bolder and more frequent. They were no longer content to lurk in the shadows. They wanted blood. It all came to a head on the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. Sarah had warned me that this would be when the veil between worlds was at its thinnest, when the Skinwalkers would be at their most powerful. We gathered at the site of my original encounter, the place where my grandfather had performed his ill-fated ritual decades ago. A small group of Navajo elders joined us, their weathered faces grim with determination. As the sun set, we began the ceremony. The air crackled with energy as we sang the ancient songs, our voices rising and falling in harmony with the desert wind. I felt the power building, coursing through me like electricity. And then they came. They emerged from the darkness like living nightmares, twisted, half-human shapes with glowing eyes and razor-sharp claws. I saw coyotes that walked like men, eagles with human faces, things that defied description. The battle that followed was like nothing I could have imagined. It raged across multiple planes of existence, physical and spiritual. I found myself moving with a speed and grace I didn't know I possessed, wielding powers I barely understood. Through it all, I could feel my grandfather's presence, guiding my actions, lending me strength. This was his fight as much as mine, his chance at redemption. As the night wore on, I found myself face to face with the leader of the Skinwalkers, a monstrous figure that seemed to shift and change even as I looked at it. In its eyes, I saw an ancient, terrible intelligence. "You cannot win," it hissed, its voice like grinding stones. "The debt must be paid." "Then let it end with me," I replied, drawing on every ounce of power I had left. What happened next is hard to describe. There was a flash of blinding light, a sensation of falling through endless space, and then silence. I awoke to find myself lying on the desert floor, the first rays of dawn breaking over the horizon. The elders were gathered around me, their faces etched with awe and relief. "It is done," Sarah said softly, helping me to my feet. "The balance has been restored." In the days that followed, I learned the full extent of what had transpired. The ritual we had performed had not just banished the Skinwalkers, it had healed the rift my grandfather's actions had created. The land itself felt different, as if a great burden had been lifted. As for me, I was changed in ways I'm still trying to understand. The connection I feel to this place, to the spirits that dwell here, is stronger than ever. I know now that my journey is far from over. There will always be forces of darkness to contend with, always a balance to be maintained. But I'm no longer afraid. I've faced my demons, both literal and figurative, and come out the other side. The legacy of my grandfather is no longer a curse, but a responsibility I bear with pride. As I write these final words, I can feel the desert wind on my face, carrying with it the whispers of ancient spirits. They no longer feel alien or threatening. They are a part of me now, as I am a part of this land. The sun is setting, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. Soon the stars will come out, a dazzling tapestry overhead, and in their light I'll continue my vigil, a guardian of the threshold between worlds. For I am no longer just a man. I am a protector, a keeper of ancient ways, a bridge between past and future. And whatever the night may bring, I am ready,